So hello again. In this lesson, we are going to talk about a very particular design pattern in iOS that is called a delegation pattern. So a delegation pattern is essentially a way for objects to communicate with each other and pass messages around. The way we use it is we use a protocol as a variable for one object to send messages to the other one. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started. I usually find delegation to be kind of a difficult topic to explain, and it's a lot easier to get used to using it. And it is something that you see literally all over iOS. Everything that we do, we use a delegation pattern. So let's go to Xcode, and I'm gonna start a new project called, it's a Swift project, Delegation Swift. So here is what we want to do with this particular delegation. I'm going to show you two other examples in the upcoming lessons as well. But I want to have a class called a user, and I want an object from that class to either send or receive a message to another class that is called, let's say, friend. These are the friends of our user in a particular, chat application. And to do that, I'm going to need what we call a protocol. I need a protocol that one of them has to use it as a variable, the other one has to use it as, let's call it a receiver. So let's get started with that. So first, I'm going to do the easy parts of this application. I'm going to add a new Swift file. And you don't really have to add it. I'm just going to add it so the code is a little bit cleaner and easier to see. I'm going to call this one user. And obviously, I'm going to add another one called friend. That's for the friend class. I'm going to add another one, and I'm going to call this one protocol. So let's see what we have in either of these. The first thing I need in the user, I have a class called the user with no superclass, no base class, and it has one variable called name, and that's a string. And that's about that. So every user has a name, and because they have a name, they also gonna have the init. So I'm gonna say init imp name is going to be a string, something we have done hundreds of times already, and self.name becomes input name. That's about that. I'm actually gonna copy this whole thing because my friend class is gonna be very similar to that. I'm gonna say that is friend, and again, every friend has a name and it has an init. My protocol is going to have a protocol, as you guessed it, protocol. My protocol is going to be called, I'm going to call it something particular, but you could essentially call it anything. The only thing that is very often, a common practice in iOS is you call it whatever you want and you finish it with delegate, even though you don't have to, but it's a common practice. So I'm going to call this protocol sending message delegate. So it's a delegate protocol that's going to send messages, and it's got only one function, and it's called send message, and it has a message that is a string. So that's about that. I've got a user class, I have a friend class, I have a protocol that they each have the things that we know they would need. So let's say this is our plan. Our plan is for our user to send a message to a friend. So we're going to have an object of the type user. We're going to have another object of the type friend, and we're going to send a message to that friend. Obviously, in an ideal world, in a real life application, there would be a two-way communication. But for now, we're only going to worry about one side of this. And this is essentially just to get a sense of how a delegation pattern essentially works. Now, since we said our user is going to send a message to a friend, I'm going to go to the friend class and say the friend class is actually conforming to my protocol, which is sending message delegate. And if you remember from our previous lesson, we now have to define that particular method, which I think we called it send message, right? So I'm going to say that, and that means friend now has a built-in function that sends message, and it runs within the body of anyone that is an object of the type friend. And I'm going to say, whenever this happens, you do this. Say print. On the print, I'm going to say, well, let's first print the name of this particular object. I'm going to say name, and then I'm going to say has received. What has it received? It has received a message, whatever is the message. So far we haven't done anything that's different than in the past. We have conformed a class to a certain protocol, and that protocol has a function, and that function is happening in a certain way. The next thing we have to do is to add a delegate of the same type as a variable to our user. So let's see how we're going to do that. I'm going to say I have a variable, and we usually call it delegate. All right. And that is of the type sending message delegate. So let's see what this actually means. This simply means that an object that is called delegate is becoming an attribute for the user objects and is of the type sending message delegates. This is very similar to saying var my string is going to be of the type NS string. We're simply using that type to introduce a new one. Now, since we are doing that, we obviously can do things such as, in the case of a string, saying my string append a string, or in the case of the delegate, saying delegate dot and calling that method from our delegate, which is send message. And that's exactly what we want to do. Now, bear with me for a minute. Let me finish this and see it to the finish line, and then I come back and we will recap everything one more time. So let's go ahead and use this. I'm going to go to my main. And in the main, I'm going to say, well, we want to have a user, we want to have a friend, and we want to send a message. So let's have a friend first. I'm going to say var. Let's call this one Jack. All right. And Jack is going to be a friend with the name, and that name is Jack. Simple as that. I'm also going to have my very own user. I'm going to say var my user. That's going to be a user with the name. And in this case, I'm going to put my name, Amir. And now we have something very interesting happening. That is, user has something called delegate. So I can actually use that. And it has to be something of this type. So the only one that we know of this type, unless we want to initialize a brand new one, are the objects of the type friend. Once again, the only thing that we can make delegate assigned to is any one of this type, the type send message delegate. And this is the only class that conforms to that. So I'm going to go to main, and I'm going to say for my user dot delegate is going to become, and you see the moment we go there, it says you have to give me a sending message delegate or someone that conforms to that. The only one in here that conforms to that is actually Jack. So now the only step that is left is that we know the tasks of this guy through the delegation are being sent to Jack. And because of that, Jack will receive that one and do something with it in here. So the only thing we have to do is we have to call this function. I'm going to go in here and say, well, now that I know who it's being delegated to, my user dot delegate dot send message. And the message is, let's say, hi from my name. So my user dot name. So let's see what happens in here. And then I'm going to recap everything. And then we're going to do two more exercises similar to this. That was an optional value I had to force unwrap it. So let's run this application. And the moment it runs, if it all goes well, we will see Jack has received hi from Amir, and Jack is this object friend which has a function called send message, which is this guy. This is the member of the protocol. So the only time that this thing gets called is if a delegate or a protocol delegate calls it. And in here I have said, well, this guy, my user, which has a variable called delegate, which has delegated its job to Jack, is sending a message, and that message is this thing. So we're going to move on to our next lesson, which I'm actually going to do one more, of these, and I'm going to re-explain everything in a perhaps a little bit, an easier way to see them, because this was more of the concept. Now we're going to see it in some sort of a practice. So I'm going to pause here for a second, and then I'm going to move into the next lesson. So I'll see you there.